It's June, which of course means it's Pride time once again, and in celebration, DC Comics is back with what's becoming a yearly tradition, uniting some of the finest queer writers and artists working today to celebrate the event in style. What'll happen next? Well, let's hop into the pages of DC Pride issue number 1, 2024, and find out together, shall we? So then, this year's Pride offering actually begins with one hell of a major departure from years past. There's no foreword, which is a real shame, because that was always one of my favorite parts of these collections. In case you don't remember, in the last 3 Pride specials, they would pick some trailblazing queer creator and give them an opportunity to introduce the book and talk about where we're at culturally right now. In terms of queer creation and queer culture, again, I can think of like 5 people off the top of my head. Morrison, Ayala, Axelrod, Orlando. Tynion the Fourth. Were these people busy, or did they worry 4 years in the forewords were just going to end up all sounding the same? Because sadly, the same issues that have been affecting the queer creative community since these DC Pride specials started haven't really changed all that much. Either way, I digress. Now, the first story in this collection comes to us courtesy of Al Ewing, which is actually kind of a big deal because this is the first time he's ever written anything for DC ever. Up until now, he's absolutely been killing it at Marvel with stuff like Immortal Hulk, Empire, and the brand new Immortal Thor going on right now. He's also a GLAAD winner, who, in case you didn't know, came out as bisexual just a couple years ago. I know I didn't know, someone had to actually tell me, and I think I have good gaydar. His story actually focuses on Starman. No, not the Starman you probably think from the TV show. No, this is the McCall Thomas version. In case you didn't know, this version of Starman is a blue-skinned alien musician who's actually going through something of a career renaissance right now, so much to the point he has a lot of young people online asking him about his own sexuality. In a bit that feels all too real, Starman admits he always hates answering these kinds of questions from his new fans because he feels like people are always trying to claim him and he doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. He's always believed himself to be bisexual because he came to Earth in the 70s, and that's just kind of how he always identified. Even though he admits that he loves men, women, anyone beyond the binary, it's just kind of the way his alien society was made up. Their hang-ups weren't sexualities, they were factionalities. And wouldn't you know it, those factionalities continue to haunt him here on Earth as he is met by Comac, an old alien from the Starman stories who has apparently become McCall's friend in the future. This guy also died in a psychic battle at a discotheque, but don't worry, he got better like all comic characters do. Comac has come here today looking for Starman's help in dealing with an old Mind Council superweapon that will soon be threatening Earth unless they do something about it. In keeping with the musical theming, this superweapon turns out to be some sort of crazy alien squid that absorbs sound, specifically the sounds of screams made by Earthlings. Luckily, with their powers combined, Starman and Comac are able to make short work of the creature. In fact, it was almost too easy, so much to the point that Starman even says, "Wait, did you do this on purpose just so we could hang out?" And in fact, Comac did just that. He says that they are the last 2 remaining members of their race. They should be a lot closer, yet sadly, factionality has torn them apart time and time again. All Comac wanted after years of being antagonistic to Starman was one glorious chance where they could fight side by side, and indeed it was magical. So magical, they end up spending the night together. And I mean, if that's not breaking down factional barriers, then I certainly don't know what is. I liked this story. I thought the art was amazing, and Ewing offers up some really great DC Comics supercuts showing that if they're ever able to steal him away from Marvel, he'll surely make some magic over here too. After that, we're treated to a Jackson Hyde Aqualad story courtesy of Ngozi Ukazu. If you haven't heard of that name before, get used to it because that's kind of a thing in this new Pride collection. There seems to be a real attempt at shining the light on some lesser known creators who haven't exactly broken through to the mainstream yet, but probably will be soon thanks to stuff like this. In the story, we see Jackson conflicted about his relationship with his boyfriend and how it might end up affecting his life as Aquaman. You know, will he have to move to Zabel? Will he be accepted by the local populace, not just because he's the son of famous Aquaman villain Black Manta, but also because, yeah, he's a queer man too. This story ends up taking a really crazy turn when Jackson's boyfriend gets grabbed by some sort of sea serpent, only it's not really a sea serpent, it's a space serpent. One that just so happened to be hunted by Orion of the New Gods. Yeah, I bet you didn't think Orion was gonna show up in this one, did you? But to the story's credit, they actually do a great job juxtaposing Aquaman and Orion. They both have supervillains for fathers, and because of that, people end up judging them harshly. Jackson also realized realizes that New Genesis is actually a super progressive place when it comes to sexuality and self-expression. Not that Orion would seem to notice, though. He's one of those battle-hardened warrior code guys who doesn't have time for love, and which just leads Jackson to believe that he might be asexual or aromantic. Together, the two team up, deal with the space serpent problem, and rescue Jackson's boyfriend. Aquaman even thinks to himself that if Orion can be comfortable where he is, then maybe he too can learn to balance his life. This was another really fun, unexpected story that sees two characters get the spotlight who don't normally get it, and it's cool to see them bounce off each other. Also, if you liked this softer, more colorful take on the new gods in the Fourth World, get ready, because the same writer is actually going to be working on a Barda story coming soon, which I guess kind of makes this promotional material. Now, the next story is the complete opposite of a softer take. In fact, this one I would say is hard as hell. It features Poison Ivy on a cosmic odyssey looking for special plants that no longer exist on Earth anymore. Her quest takes her to an alien world where she discovers that she's not the only Earthlings there. There's also some right-wing televangelist religious types preaching about the evils of the gays and how they'll bring down even this great alien society. A harsh but unfortunately necessary reminder that one of the worst things about homophobia and transphobia is that it doesn't always live in your own backyard. Way too often it gets exported to the developing world. One of these Jerry Falwell-ass preacher guys attempts to call Poison Ivy a groomer, and you know what she ends up doing? Pamela gets this guy eaten from the inside out by a bunch of fungus. And honestly, it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, could it have? Sadly, this outburst ends up getting Poison Ivy branded as an outlaw from justice and a massive bounty put on her head, meaning that when she's ready to collect her plant samples from the Jabba the Hutt-style alien who runs this place, she ends up getting double-crossed and handed over to the very same Bible thumpers who are looking to make a quick buck. Luckily, Poison Ivy is always able to make lemonade out of lemons, and she figures now is the perfect time to actually try out these plants she was after. Turns out they're incredibly powerful psychedelics, which in ancient time early man used to commune with their gods. Pamela gives these real-life Maud Flanders a quadruple dose, meaning that once their high ends up coming down, hopefully they'll have learned some important lessons about equality. It's after that we're treated to a story about a queer breakup, which is actually kind of special considering how writers usually have to fight super hard to include queer love stories in their work. We basically never get to see a breakup happen in comics. It's Natasha Irons who gets invited by Raven to a special pride party being held at the Oblivion, thrown by Traci 13, who just so happens to be her ex. Aw, isn't that cute? Science loves magic and magic loves science, or at least they did until things ended up going wrong. The party itself is super cool visually too, because there's a ton of different background Easter eggs for everyone to enjoy. The whole situation ends up getting really awkward when Traci sees her ex across the room and she ends up asking for help from John Constantine, as well as Zhao the Envoy. Oh, look at that, someone remembered We Are Legends. Nice to see them still kicking around. Eventually, the two girls are forced to sit down and work out their problems one-on-one. We learned that Natasha had thrown herself so heavily into her work, she ended up neglecting Traci, especially as her own superhero career started to ascend past her girlfriends, which, yeah, it certainly did feel like that for a minute, didn't it, between that Warworld saga and the Steelbook? Natasha also ghosted Traci because she didn't exactly know how to talk about these sorts of things, but they're talking about it now, and they both agreed to an amicable split. Which is good, because, you know, it's a small queer DC universe, which means they're almost certainly going to keep running into each other at parties and special anthology stories like this one. Following that, we get a story that is pure slice of life as we see Jonathan Kent the Superman, his boyfriend Jay Nakamura, fellow young queer hero Bunker, as well as their brand new tag-along The Ray, who despite looking basically the same age as all these guys, we're told is indeed a queer elder. Today is a very special day in A-Town. It's an alien food festival, so all the friends decided to get together and hit the town, even wearing their finest fits. I particularly like John, who has gone full Castro clone with his tight denim jeans and white cutoffs. In fact, A-Town in general in this story feels a lot like a G-rated take on the Folsom Street Fair or any similar gathering. This story doesn't have any high stakes or villains to fight, it's just boys being dudes, man, though eventually we do get some stuff with the Ray later, as he, you know, isn't used to this kind of thing. He was a sheltered, homeschooled kid who gets overstimulated really easily, and he's not used to being this out and proud, especially around other young men like Jon Jon and Jay, who are already way more comfortable with themselves at their age than he was at his. But, life's a sprint, not a race, and Superman and the others are going to be here to support the Ray during everything. It's very sweet. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a DC Pride collection without the yearly Nicole Main's Dreamer story, though this one takes a different avenue by mostly being about Naya's connection to her family, especially her mother, who is dead now, but who may very well have left a breadcrumb trail for her daughter to follow. That also just so happens to be connected to the bigger Dreamer mythos. This story ends by reminding us that if you want more Dreamer, there's the Bad Dreams novel coming out, as well as the ongoing Suicide Squad Dream Team book. Indeed, Dreamer has actually done pretty damn good for herself over the last little bit, no doubt about it. And transversely, a character who has not done good for themselves is Jules Jourdain, aka Circuit Breaker. For those who don't remember, this character was created in a backup for the Lazarus Planet event, was heralded as the next big thing in the Flash universe, only for them to only continue to appear in these DC Pride anthologies and nowhere else. Also, all this time later, and people keep trying to tell me that this character was meant to represent Ezra Miller because they too are a non-binary actor in the Flash universe. Yeah, I don't get it either. For what it's worth, this story does actually end up connecting to what's going on in the Cy Spurrier stories as of currently. Circuit Breaker teams up with Jay Garrick and helps him fight some Speed Force monsters, and we're told that this story will actually continue in the 10th issue of The Flash. So hey, maybe Circuit Breaker can finally break from just doing the DC Pride circuit, but only time will tell. There's a Harley and Ivy story in this collection too, but it's literally just a preview of a book that isn't out yet. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about something that's literally just a piece of promotional material, and instead go right ahead to the big main event piece of this year's DC Pride collection, which is an autobiographical piece courtesy of superstar artist Phil Jimenez, who just so happened to be the foreword writer of last year's collection. In the story, Mr. Jimenez talks about knowing that he was a gay man from a very young age. He had a crush on Fred from Scooby-Doo, and his imagination was absolutely set ablaze the first time he ever read about Wonder Woman's Themyscira, this wonderful, queer-coded utopia that he always wished he could have lived in. In fact, the rest of his life, he would often try and chase these utopias either in his own mind or in his own work. In a nice little artistic flair, the story even pulls back to when we realize that an older Phil is telling this story to his younger self. He talks about how his drive to build worlds is what ultimately got him a job at DC Comics and allowed him to realize his dream of finally writing Wonder Woman. Of course, it just so happened to be in a story wherein he had to kill Hippolyta and blow up his beloved utopia. Because hey, this is comic books and we always gotta sell the next event, right? If nothing else, Jimenez did finally get a chance to make new Themyscira, a place so cool that built on the inclusionary ideas of the past and made them bigger and better, so much to the point that apparently even George Perez complimented him on this. But sadly, because comic books are comic books, New Themyscira would also end up being destroyed. Jimenez says that this ultimately depressed him, thinking that he had failed these characters he loved so much. But you know what, you live, you learn from that, you move on to the next thing. And you forever strive to make the next great world that will inspire the next great young writer to dream their dreams and make their art, because that world truly is paradise. And so that was DC Pride 2024, everyone, and while I certainly enjoyed it, I'd be lying if I said this one didn't feel like something of a mixed bag. Oh, don't get me wrong, the first and final stories are powerhouse showstoppers, and that Poison Ivy story was my personal favorite and probably worth the price of admission on its own. But the lack of a foreword, and honestly the lack of a lot of marketing around this year's offering, kind of makes me feel like DC dropped the ball just a little bit on this one, and that it all comes in slightly under the very high bar set by the last 3 years worth of stories. Now, that being said, the fact that this thing has been around for 4 years and we can actually contrast and compare the yearly offerings is in and of itself something of a small miracle, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that even in the stories I was enjoying, there was something kind of off here. Maybe it's because there's more actual promotional stories in this one, trying to get you to pick up other stuff where in years past the book was so great because all the stories were these really tight one-and-done tales with beginnings, middles, and ends. The book also makes the very bold choice to focus on a lot of creators who aren't exactly household names yet, creators who probably need more reps, and hopefully being part of a big collection like this will be able to get more eyes on their work. I know I'll certainly be looking out for more of these creators in the future. Overall, I think I'd feel comfortable giving this one an 8 out of 10. It's not as strong as last year's DC Pride, but I know it's going to make a lot of underserved fans very happy, and here's hoping that this continues to be be a tradition so that we can have 5 years of Pride next year. And speaking of tradition, I'm now going into my comment section, which I'm sure will be very cool and very normal. Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Joel again, thanking you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not check out my Amazon link down in the description. Yes, that's right, the Cape Joel channel officially has its own Amazon storefront now. You can pick up a comic or anything else for that matter, and if you did, you'd really be helping me in the channel. So with that out of the way everyone, I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.